Let me start with this story. Just every time I come into Michigan, I fly into Detroit and I rent a car there. And whenever at the car rental agency, they always ask me, you know, the people helping you fill out all the paperwork, are you here? And I tell them it's for business and I'm trying to do something about their electric rates. And these are just your typical residential customers, and they always say, please, please do something. I can't afford it. I don't know what else to do. So Chairman Quackenbush, that might be something for you to consider as you see all these rate increases and as the Commission reviews them, whether it's retail rates or whether it's wholesale capacity costs. There's been talk about how Michigan's rates are higher, and I won't go through some of my slides because essentially they've been gone over. Let me show you one though. The Midwest Independent System Operator, just last month, they did a comparison, an average rate comparison for Michigan and all other MISO member states. Michigan, as you can see, is at the very top. Its average rates are 20% higher than, Michigan's rates are 20% higher than average MISO rates. If you think that doesn't matter in terms of having an impact on consumers and businesses, you need to talk to more of them. Now, I've also heard, and this is very interesting, that in fact Michiganders benefit from higher electric rates. Okay, well, what do you get for your higher electric rates? Well, the arguments are as follows. One, Michigan gets higher system reliability. If utilities build electric generating plants and operate them, that's going to provide more electric independence for Michigan and greater reliability. A second argument is that there's a better environmental footprint. Again, Michiganders apparently support the 25 by 25 renewables program proposal. I believe that's on the ballot for this next month. And that means Michiganders are willing to pay extra for cleaner electricity. Another argument is greater adaptability without competition. In other words, limiting competition means that Michigan can better adapt to the inherent uncertainties and risks that we know are going to arise. As someone who started his career as a load forecaster, I can tell you that the only thing I can guarantee about my load forecast for 20 years out is they'd be wrong. And finally, there's a lot of talk about competition being a zero-sum game. Well, let me talk about all of these. Does limiting competition improve reliability? Well, Michigan is interconnected with both the Midwest Independent System Operator and PJM. In MISO's latest 2012 expansion plan, transmission expansion plan, it shows over $500 million in new transmission investment in Michigan. That's more than any other state, and no transmission constraints. So if Michigan tries this raise the drawbridge approach to electric independence, all that's going to do is reduce reliability, not improve it, and it will lead to higher costs. The entire point of having regional transmission organizations like PJM and MISO is to improve reliability and lower costs by essentially spreading the risk of outages across more utilities, having more backup. The other argument is that, well, competitive generators don't want to build in Michigan. Well, they did build until 2008. Now they wouldn't want to. But essentially, when regulators and politicians indicate their hostility to in-state investment by competitive generators and to competition in general, well then of course they're not going to build in Michigan. The prophecy becomes self-fulfilling. You're essentially hanging a large sign that says, do not invest, in flashing lights in Michigan by essentially trying to change the rules to undercut competitors. What about the environment? Is limiting retail competition really better for the environment? Well, the answer to that is no. Competitive generators have a huge incentive to minimize environmental costs in the most economic way possible, for the simple reason that they can't pass those costs along to ratepayers like electric utilities can. Merchant generators can only recover economic investments in a competitive market. That means that their customers are not exposed to those risks, unlike a monopoly electric utility that's simply able to pass those costs on. That's how incumbent utilities work. They're essentially protected from uneconomic decisions because they can just pass on those risks and costs to their customers. Now, from an operational standpoint, I've been told that 25 by 25 will improve the environment. Well, I've got a study coming out, hopefully in a week or so, on intermittent wind generation. And MISO is the most egregious example of when you really need the power the most when wind power is not available. Less than 10% of the time in peak hours, you'll find wind generators actually providing power. They're great at providing power when you don't need it, when prices are low, but when you need, on those hot, humid, sultry dog days of August or July, the wind power is not there. And that means you need more gas-fired backup. You need more backup generation, which costs more to operate, which is inefficient, and which pollutes the air. Not to mention all the impacts of the wind generators themselves. So it's not true that limiting competition is good for the environment, just the opposite. What about competition not being a way to address future risk and uncertainty, that limiting competition is better for that? Well, again, merchant generators face huge economic incentives to evaluate future economic risks as best they can, because they must bear the cost of their decisions. Again, regulated electric utilities do not bear those same risks, so their incentives are very different. Essentially, regulated utilities manage the risks that their regulators tell them to manage, and they don't worry about the other ones. Plus, risk management is never free. Hedging, if you're concerned about, say, volatile natural gas costs, well, hedging's expensive. It's like buying insurance. You end up losing money on average. I was involved in a case earlier this year with Rocky Mountain Power. Rocky Mountain Power spent over $1 billion on natural gas hedges. It turns out most of them were out of the money, and so they lost money. Again, all those costs went right to ratepayers. So when a regulated firm is hedging risks, its customers are really paying for it. And you have to ask, well, what do the customers want? The customers can hedge those risks just as well. So really what you have to deal with is, well, if you're a regulator, should you have your utility hedge risks? And if so, why? Why can't customers hedge those risks? Finally, you hear that competition is a zero-sum game. That if we allow greater competition in Michigan, that means whoever isn't competing is going to be paying for it. Well, that's simply wrong. Competition is not a zero-sum game. Ask Apple Computer, ask Microsoft, ask Google, ask Walmart. These firms succeed and make everyone better off because of competition. Moreover, one of the things that when you hear these arguments from utilities and advocates of eliminating competition is that from a simple standpoint, if you have greater competition and more customers are buying non-utility power, well, the utilities have more surplus power they can actually sell. And it's very ironic that in other states, DTE and Consumer Energy's retail subsidiaries are competing, and they're winning. And they're selling power to those customers at lower prices than what they sell to their own customers in Michigan. Maybe that's why it's a zero-sum game. I don't know. That's a very odd term for it. but competition really does work, and the arguments against it simply hold no water. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, thank you, and thank you for coming, and I'm flattered to have been invited. Actually, before I get into these electricity issues, I just want to note, I don't know, a few of you had an opportunity to have one of those Iraqi cookies that I brought. Bushra Abdullah, who's made those, is the wife of a good friend of mine who was one of the interpreters for U.S. forces in Iraq that our Little Knights of Columbus group in Baghdad did the paperwork for to immigrate to the U.S. as in recognition of their service to U.S. forces. So she makes these absolutely wonderful Arabic and Iraqi cookies and stuff, does party trays and all that. So I had dinner with the family last night, and I brought her cards and everything. So if you're having a party or whatever, and but especially the date and cardamom cookies are the best thing going with a cup of coffee or milk. So I'll let her know that I did my bit. That's competition for you. They're out to live the American dream. And she's just started her own little bakery operation again, so she's competing with the big guys. We know how that is. The second thing I just note that Chairman Quackenbush I've known for a long, long time. He was a young analyst at the Illinois Commerce Commission when I was chairman, and he was always the smartest guy in the room, and probably still is, I guess, with the possible exception of some bright young analyst who works for him. And he was at the Illinois Commerce Commission in the early 80s when the Illinois Commission actually issued the first papers advocating a transition toward competitive electricity. So he is very familiar with the underlying issues that we're dealing with here. Fundamentally, there really is no longer an argument about whether competitive electricity supply works. It works. I mean, it's sort of the old story about, theoretically the bumblebee can't fly. Well, it does, and competitive electricity flies quite well. So what I'm here to do is just two things. One is to briefly cover what's happening around the country in competitive jurisdictions where customers are voting with their feet, and also just to briefly touch on the sort of the cost implications for Michigan businesses and residential consumers of not having competitive choice. There's been a surge the past few years. During this economic downturn, 08 through 11, in the 18 choice jurisdictions that account for about 44% of all electricity consumed in the country, there has been a dramatic growth in volumes. Now, nationally, electricity volumes have been roughly flat during this period, 08 through 11. However, of that flat volume increase, competitive volumes have increased 40%. So where customers have the opportunity to choose a competitive supplier, they're doing so. And it's not only the commercial and industrial customers, it's increasingly the residential customers. So for example, in Commonwealth Edison's area, in the Chicago metropolitan area where I live, close to 40% of the customers have switched. And that's actually a statewide number as well. That's the residentials. They're doing it through muni aggregation as well as choosing individual suppliers. So this 40% increase has come along with an over 50% increase in the number of customers choosing. That reflects the surge of small business and residential customers. So in 2012, if we haven't already done it, we will see that 20% threshold reached. And by that I mean that of all the kilowatt hours consumed in the United States, 20% will be served under some kind of competitive contract, and it's just those 18 jurisdictions that are accounting for that. So 1 out of every 5 kilowatt hours in this country is being supplied in 2012 through competitive contracts of one kind or another. I'm just going to quickly run through these slides. As you can see, this sort of flatlined consumption of electricity, no more in 2011 than in 2008. However, the choice load volumes have surged dramatically by 200 million megawatt hours during that period of time. So it's gone from about 488 million megawatt hours nationally in 2008 to nearly 700 million megawatt hours in 2011, and it's certainly pierced that number in 2012. And similarly, the number of customers has grown from somewhere over 7 million to just about 11 million, and it's probably close to 12 now or higher. But let me just get through these. I want to get to the heart of it. You know, choice doesn't happen by accident. It's a function of a specific public policies. And in those states where public policy has remained consistent, where there's been clarity, what we've seen is a dramatic growth in choice supply. And rarely are the customers in a position where, you know, the government's holding a gun to their head and telling them you've got to leave, you've got to go. Now that does happen to some extent, where certain options are closed off being provided by the utility. But as a general matter, initially, customers are making the choice as to whether to stay with the traditional approach or whether to leave. And of course, they've left in droves. So of course, you need the stable rules. The regulation has to be consistent. You've got to have wholesale competition and open access. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has done a marvelous job nationally in making that the case. You've got to get to cost-based delivery rates. In other words, you can't be mixing up supply with the wires charges. That also helps to get rid of cross-subsidies. Now, in most of the states that have gone to competition, Illinois being a prime example, there are no longer cross-subsidies going from one class of customers to another. So if you're an industrial customer, you're going to pay what your cost of service is in the competitive market. If you're a residential customer, you'll do so similarly. You don't have commercial customers, stores and office buildings and so forth, providing subsidies to residential customers. And we've weathered that in Illinois and these other states quite well. In Michigan, you still have a massive set of cross-subsidies going on that distort price signals. You have a market-based default service. Pretty easy to put together, where if for any reason a customer needs to have service that he doesn't contract for, there's a default service that's there, and it's priced appropriately. You need to have customer data available, not only to the suppliers, but to the customers. And one of the things we find is that when customers have easy access to that information, they do a lot more with it in a competitive system than in a monopoly system. In any event, there are a number of things, but these are all things that have to be done by the public sector in cooperation with the utilities and the customers and the competitive suppliers. So it doesn't happen by itself, and it's hard work. The only problem in Michigan is you already did it once, and it was working pretty well, and for a variety of reasons, we're all back talking about it again. So what's happening in individual states? Well, I won't dwell on any of them, but the point of all these trend lines is they're all up. And that's true with both commercial and industrial and with residential. So we see in a place like Connecticut, where there's been a terrific surge during this economic downturn of customers, business customers moving to choice. But look at these numbers on residential. You've gone from a time in 2008 where it was 10% or below in the two utilities to the point where it's about 50% of residential customers being served competitively. It's a huge shift in just a couple of years, particularly in an industry where everyone's mindset is conditioned by 100 years of a particular way of doing things. New Jersey, very similar kind of surge in use. These numbers on residential while it's only up to about 15 to 20% currently, that was from a base of 0 in 2010. So customers are making their own decisions to move. The other thing we see is that moving to choice is a utility by utility phenomenon, because that's the way we regulate in this country. So as a general matter, states don't come up with one set of rules, one timetable, where all the utilities in a state are in lockstep. And there's nothing particularly wrong with that, because over time, states will harmonize the rules between and among their utilities, and increasingly the states are harmonizing the rules across the state. So it's easier and easier for competitive suppliers to operate using the same data systems, same billing systems, that kind of thing. So you see that there's a different performance level in Ohio, but because of the rule changes there and the commission giving itself over to competition, we'll see all of these numbers in the next couple of years for business being up in the 90+% of customers choosing competition. The other thing in Ohio that's particularly interesting has been the role of muni aggregation. So we have about, in a couple of the utilities, 50 to 60% of all of the utility residential customers on choice. They're doing that not so much as individuals, but through their communities, where their local towns and cities and villages have opted to go into the market, acquire supplies, and provide them on an optional basis to their residents. And again, this is all done usually with a competitive supplier serving as the contractor for that community. Pennsylvania, again, differences among the utilities, but all these trend lines are all pointing up. Maryland, similar situation. Now let me take Illinois, which of course is near and dear to me. Interesting point on prices in Illinois, and this I would say was developing as the case in Michigan, and then the state did a 180. For the entire decade prior to the implementation of choice in Illinois, Illinois was at about an average of 112% of the national average in electricity prices. So 12% over the national average. Since the implementation of choice, that average has been 10% below the national average. So roughly a 20-point swing. And I think largely attributable to the implementation of choice. So we are at the point in Illinois where consistently, over the past decade, prices have been considerably below the national average. Now, we have to take a breather on price. The price analysis and price comparisons are very difficult and complex analysis. And I actually do not advocate choice so much on the basis of average price level. Because as we know, in the Northeast, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, those are the most highly priced states in the country, but they all have choice. We know that electricity prices, for the most part, are accounted for by underlying factors that are not influenced that much by choice. The upper Midwest, however, is an interesting exception to that, probably, where the underlying factors are shared pretty commonly among Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. And yet where we see choice in Illinois and increasingly in Ohio, we see a downtrend. In the regulated states, we see the prices going up. Well, why is that? Well, one of the bizarre features of traditional regulation is that when you have too much of something, you raise the price. And it turns out you lower the price when you have too little. The price signals are all out of whack. The key thing that competitive choice delivers in electricity, and anything else for that matter, is the proper price signals. It tells you when there's a shortage. It tells you when there's an excess. That's the real issue. Further, in the competitive states, we're seeing the very rapid flow through of the benefit of falling natural gas prices. And so now what we see in Illinois and Ohio is this downtrend in prices that's really quite dramatic, while at the same time in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Indiana, which are all traditionally regulated for the most part, we see that prices are rising because they're relatively impervious to the impact of the falling natural gas prices. Well, one final point, and by the way, this I believe these slides will all be available, but you really can't see it. And here in Michigan, these are the ratios of Michigan average price to the national average price. You've seen some of this already. But it was in the high 90s, so you were below the national average in the early years of this decade. Then, of course, you began to rise after the re-regulation to the point where you are above the national average. The only explanation for that change in reversal of trajectory at this point is the change in the regulatory framework. So how much is this costing? Well, give or take, about 11% of total load is on choice. There's some grandfathering in there under the 10% quota. About 9.2 million megawatt hours. All right. We also have the unserved queue. The list is roughly about the same size, about 11%. We know that the energy component, average energy component of prices in Michigan, is about 2 cents per kilowatt or $20 per megawatt hour higher than the competitive market. So what that means is for that group that has signed up for choice, but is not being allowed yet to have choice, that average is about $184 million annually at the current spread. So that's $184 million that group of customers is not realizing in savings. If Michigan had about 40% of load on choice, and believe me, if we're allowed, they'd be there, that's equal to nearly $500 million in savings, in total savings, comparing the monopoly price now to the competitive price now. If Michigan were to achieve the levels of competitive choice as we have in Illinois, of close to 2/3 of all load, that is about $1 billion difference. So these are very substantial numbers that at the moment, you're not being allowed to realize here. So let me conclude with that. I don't know. We're going to take questions when we're done. Okay. Thanks very much.
Well, good afternoon. Pleased to be here in Michigan. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I'm here to help you. Pretty frightening, isn't it? Well, all God's children got to live someplace, and that's where I live. And one of my clients, I'm a lawyer, one of my clients is the Compete Coalition. The paper that Phil O'Connor wrote was commissioned by the Compete Coalition. Who are we? We're now 677 electricity stakeholders, very diverse national coalition. About a fourth of our members are customers. You had a quote to start with up here from Steve Elsing, who is the head energy guy for Leggett and Platt, a large manufacturing firm. Steve's on our board of directors, for example. But we have about a fourth of our members are customers. We have suppliers such as Exelon, First Energy Solutions. Traditional and clean energy generators are among our members. Transmission owners, trade associations such as the American Wind Energy Association is a part of our membership. Technology innovators, companies such as Tendril, headquartered in Colorado. It's a smart grid company that likes to thrive in competitive electricity markets. Environmental organizations. By the way, we negotiated a policy statement with the Environmental Defense Fund that declared that the best opportunities to achieve our nation's lofty environmental goals are going to be in electricity markets rather than monopolies. And economic development corporations. We're organized around a single principle, and we're growing by about 100 members each year. And the single principle is that well-structured competitive electricity markets at both the wholesale and the retail levels are in the best interest of consumers, will achieve environmental goals, and are in the best interest of our nation as a whole, as we as a nation strive to remain competitive in the world market. Some quotes from some of our customer members. The first one, Steve Elsey. You had a different quote from Steve up here. George Wadelick, Safeway, also a member of our board of directors. From Angie Beeler, Walmart Stores, also a member of our board of directors. Mark Morgan, 7-Eleven. How long do you think you might end up circling the airport? Well, principle number one for these large regional wholesale markets is they're operated independently of market participants. They got no skin in the game. They are all about innovation. They're all about new entrants. The barbarians at the gate, knocking on the gate, saying, let us into the monopoly. Just let us in and let us serve. We have new products and services, innovative products that you would never have dreamed of 20 years ago, we can now bring to the marketplace. So you are fortunate to do business in these well-structured markets. I have other features of these wholesale markets. Because a well-structured wholesale market is the right foundation for a well-structured retail market. Now, in these meetings with FERC commissioners, FERC chairmen, members of Congress, what do these customer members say? Well, the first thing they talk about is prices. Now, Phil is correct. It's price issues sometimes are hard to explain. It really depends on the fuel mix, whether you're in a high-price state, low-price state, often. Here's what we discovered. We went back and looked at the data from the Energy Information Administration of the U.S. Department of Energy. Going back 15 years, we looked at data from 1997 through 2011. What did we discover? Over that 15 years, and this is all adjusted for inflation, over that 15 years, retail rates increased 1% in retail choice states, but increased 8.8% in states that relied on monopolies. What about residential rates? That's in the aggregate, all classes of customers. What about residential rates? They actually decreased 3.8% in the retail choice states, but increased 4.2% in other states. That's an 8 percentage point difference. What about commercial rates? They decreased 6.3% in retail choice states, increased 2.7% in other states. That's right at a 9% difference. Same for industrial. I don't know why I didn't put them here. It was simply a mistake. But the delta between the rates in the choice states and the monopoly states is, again, for industrial consumers, about 8%. So, If you're concerned about price issues, markets have done better at retail over the last 15 years. This is counterintuitive to some people, but it is nonetheless true. So our customer members talk about the price differentials and how they believe they actually get better prices in markets. What about the other kinds of customer value? Broad customer value in the markets. They really like the supply side options that they get in markets. Lots of competitive generation plants. They can shop for the desired generation mix. Some of these customer members want to move to renewable energy as much as they can. They can find that in markets. There are suppliers that will provide it. In other words, the customer gets to choose its own generation mix. It's not determined by the monopoly or by the government. They really like demand side options in markets. There's a lot of innovation on the demand side these days. And customers like to participate in demand response programs where they can offer their demand response into the marketplace, actually get paid for that demand response. So they are brought into the marketplace as actual competitors themselves with the supply option, supply and demand competing. When I was at the commission at FERC, we were often troubled by the fact that in markets you sometimes just had the supply option. You didn't have the demand option nearly as much. But in markets as they mature, both supply and demand come into the market as participants. These customer members of ours really like that. They feel that they're in charge of their electricity destiny. This is what one of our customers told us about the synergies they get. This customer was supplanting peak demand using solar technology and smoothing out peaks using advanced battery storage systems. They get this in markets. They were not getting it in the monopoly. Others have mentioned this. In a market, the supplier bears the risk of less than optimal business decisions. The supplier wants to go out, build a generating plant, install a new technology. They don't have a guaranteed recovery of those costs. They have to take that risk. They're going to calculate that risk very carefully, be very, very efficient. In a monopoly, those costs are put in rate base and consumers pay them. If they end up being bad investment decisions, that's too bad. In markets, the risk shifts to the suppliers. These customer members really like that. They really like getting away from the one-size-fits-all of a monopoly. That troubles them more than anything. Why do we just have to accept one product offered by the monopoly utility? We want flexible contract lengths, flexible terms. We want to be able to buy risk management products. We want renewable energy content that we can find in markets. Sometimes we want on-site services like retro commissioning of buildings. To tell you the truth, I didn't know what that meant. But basically going back to existing buildings and installing the most energy efficient technology that can be provided. On-site generation. Increased energy efficiency in markets. Our customer members see the competitors competing to be the most efficient suppliers possible, because with a lot of competitors, the margins are often slim. And then, as I said, customers are invited into the market as participants. Customers can sell their own services, their own electricity services in the form of demand response or demand reduction services for which they can be paid. And wrapping up here, I noticed Governor Snyder spoke about he wants environmental values in whatever approach is taken moving forward. Adaptability. He wants reasonable prices, and he wants reliability. Competitive markets provide all of that. Fewer generation plants needed in markets because the suppliers have the incentive to increase their efficiency. What about reliability? Listen, let me tell you from my experience at FERC. I was a FERC commissioner for 10 years, cast 28,000 votes. When we moved to competitive markets, the incumbent utilities fought it, tooth and nail. And when they couldn't win on most of the arguments they were raising, what did they do? They played the reliability card. Oh my God, the sky's going to fall. It ain't true. The reliability card is the last refuge of the monopoly. Competitive markets have proven to be highly reliable. The RTO, structured wholesale markets, in my view, have actually improved reliability in the industry. The reliability policymakers at NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Council, recognize that competitive markets and the demand response they provide actually enhance reliability. And finally, and this is the primary point, do you want the government to be in charge or monopolies to be in charge, or do you want the customers to be in charge of their electricity destiny? What makes more sense to you as Americans? Don't you want to decide about the length of your contracts? Do you want to decide about pricing options? If you want to buy renewable energy, don't you want to do that in your own free choice? You want to participate in demand response markets. You want improved customer service because of the focus. This is what our customer members tell us. And let me wrap up by saying the overall description of all these points is really innovation. Look at the innovation that has come from markets for other goods and services. Can you imagine that in the electric power industry? Yes, you can, moving forward. But you've got to let the new entrants into the markets. You can't block them at the state border with rules favoring the monopoly. You've got to say, come into this state. Provide your services, drive down the prices, provide the innovation that our customers in Michigan truly want and that we need as a nation. Thank you very much.
People who are all experts on electricity, regulated electricity choice, and so a lot of what I'm probably going to tell you is the same thing, but it's going to be from a customer's perspective. So that's a little bit different. So good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Steinerburner, an energy specialist working for Marathon Petroleum Corporation, headquartered in Findlay, Ohio. Marathon Petroleum owns facilities throughout the Midwest and in the Gulf Coast. This is in regulated and deregulated electricity states. My department manages electricity expenses for Marathon Petroleum's 6 refineries, over 80 pipeline stations, 83 terminals, and approximately 1,460 convenience stores. Those are the Speedway convenience stores where you get your coffee and gas. Marathon Petroleum has many assets located in Michigan also, including the last refinery in the state, Marathon Petroleum's Detroit refinery, 300 Speedway convenience stores, along with a number of terminals and pipelines. And why I'm here today is I wanted to talk to you about the importance of electricity competition and how it will promote economic growth and jobs in Michigan. Historically, electricity prices have been high in Michigan, which is why Michigan chose to deregulate the electricity market back in the industry back in 2000. This gave industries and business a chance to take on more price risk to better manage and potentially lower their electricity costs. This opportunity made Michigan an attractive state for industry to expand, which is exactly what Marathon is doing with the Detroit refinery. However, in 2008, PA 286 was passed, and an arbitrary 10% cap was placed on electricity choice. This was due to the utilities requesting a guarantee of customers so that they could build new generation in the state. Here we are now, in fourth quarter 2012, 4 years later. No new generation has been built in Michigan. The 10% cap is full. However, here's Marathon Petroleum in the midst of finalizing its $2.2 billion refinery expansion project at our Detroit refinery plant, which brought 1,800 construction jobs and 60 new full-time employees at a time when Michigan needed just this type of economic development. While the refinery was fortunate enough to get into the electricity choice program, under the 10% cap back in 2010, the new expanded load cannot access the electricity market rates due to the fact that the 10% cap is full. The new load will pay over 30% more for its electricity rates. This will be paid to the regulated utility company, Detroit Edison, and this is compared to our electricity choice costs. This equates to millions and millions of dollars annually. While I don't believe there's one answer for all states, electricity deregulation or electricity regulation, it is quite obvious that in Michigan, the regulatory model is not working. Electricity rates under regulation are skyrocketing, and they're not mimicking competition, not mimicking competitive rates. And they should be. So the only viable option is to continue to open the electricity market beyond the 10% cap for those companies that want and need to manage their electricity costs so that they can remain competitive in their own marketplace. The gas and shale boom that is occurring right next door to Michigan is an energy game changer, Michigan needs to be an active participant in this energy boom. That could fuel the next industrial expansion in the Midwest. Michigan needs to be part of it. Don't hold Michigan industry and businesses back through captive, high-cost regulation. Move Michigan forward with more electricity competition. On one final note, I was recently at a rally, a campaign rally, and I'll let you decide whose rally it was at. But what stuck with me was 3 words. Wake up, Ohio. Well, I want to say to you, wake up, Michigan. Last year, I was able to vote on my ballot for an aggregation program in Ohio to get electricity choice. Michigan doesn't have that option because the 10% cap is full. You need to bring that option to your residential customers too. Michigan doesn't have the opportunity. Wake up, Michigan. Thank you.
I don't know what to do anymore. Many programs like tax abatements, forgivable loans, educational initiatives are geared towards attracting investments to Michigan and to create jobs. Businesses are allowed to freely negotiate and purchase raw materials, equipment, packaging, freight, and even health insurance. Only purchasing electricity is different. Why is that? Why can't we also buy electricity on the open market? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gerhard Goss. From my accent, you might guess I'm a born German, but I'm living in the United States now since about 20 years. 14 years ago, I moved to Michigan, and in 2004, I became a US citizen. I live and work in the Kalamazoo area, southwest Michigan. I'm a director of administration and controlling. I'm the 401k trustee of our company. I'm a corporate officer for J. Rettenmeyer USA LP, which is headquartered in Schoolcraft, Michigan, just south of Kalamazoo. JR USA LP is a privately owned company. We manufacture dietary fibers and functional fillers for technical applications. The owner started 15 years ago in the United States with a very significant investment in Michigan. Now we operate 2 plants in Michigan, in Schoolcraft and in Portage, and 1 plant in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. In these 15 years, we generated approximately 150 new jobs. About 90% of these jobs are still presently in Michigan based. Our production process is very modern and energy efficient. Nevertheless, electricity is our highest manufacturing cost factor after labor. Our Portage plant is in consumers' energy territory. The Schoolcraft facility is in AEP, Indiana Michigan Power's territory, and the Schoolcraft facility is about 3.5 times needs more electricity than the Portage plant. We are seeing and having to live with exorbitant rate increases from our existing utility suppliers, inaccessible lower cost electricity that is sold in Michigan today, and we see lower cost electricity from out-of-state alternative energy suppliers that we are being blocked from using. After surveying the business climate in several states, Redmire invested in Michigan for logistic reasons and because the available labor force and because of the competitive electricity cost which became deregulated at the time when we started commercial production in the year 2000. But we quickly learned that the deregulated market in Michigan was still self-regulated by the utilities. This virtually eliminated competition among available electricity providers for us. We experienced what can be called, I believe, a territorial monopoly. Still today, our Portage plant cannot benefit from lower electricity costs that AEP, Indiana Michigan Power, is supplying to Schoolcraft, just 5 minutes away, at almost half the cost. If Portage could buy from Indiana Michigan Power at today's rate, that would create for this small facility a $425,000 saving per year. The Portage plant, as a user of electricity, and all the other plants for that matter, we look at the total compounded cost. The compounded rate is simply the total invoiced amount divided by the kWh. Consumer Energy's compounded rate increased 14% from the 2010 average of 10.7 cents per kWh to a 2012 average of 12.25 cents per kilowatt hour. For our Portage plant, that means $130,000 of additional cost per year. In 2011, we put our Portage plant into the queue. The potential saving could be 28% for us. That would translate in approximately $320,000 to $350,000 a year. Such savings would make us more competitive and would generate more business. That would translate into more production volume. By that, more jobs would be created and further investments would become possible. In 2008, starting in 2008, we see electricity costs in our Schoolcraft facility climb at a very steep rate. Over the last 3 years, Indiana Michigan Power's compounded rate exploded by 30%, from a 2010 average of 5.8 cents a kWh to a 2012 average of 7.5 cents. For our Schoolcraft plant, that means more than $540,000 of additional cost this year alone. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I took the liberty to put a graph together. I hope you can all see that. 2003, 100%. That was the cost. If we say the 2003 kWh cost was 100, it stayed flat to 2008. 2008, the law changed. It climbed this way, ladies and gentlemen. That's what our bills say every month. Presently, no strong approved alternatives are available for us in Schoolcraft, therefore we are not in the queue. Despite not being in the queue, Indiana Michigan Power is charging us what they call a customer choice implementation cost recovery surcharge of 0.1203 cents per kilowatt hour. This is a new cost for us, which started in March this year. It's an additional cost of approximately $40,000 a year for us. And we have not even signed up for this choice. It is fact that we are paying for what is called the choice, but apparently the only choices we have are to pay what is being built and suffer against our own competition, or move production to our Iowa plant and become more competitive. With plants in Michigan and Iowa, we can easily compare the typical compounded cost between both states. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 5.75 cents per kWh. Schoolcraft, Indiana, Michigan Power territory, 7.5. This is 30% more than Iowa. Portage in Consumers territory, 12.25 cents a kWh. That's 113% more than Iowa. As a result of that, we are experiencing lower cost structure in Cedar Rapids and have already moved some production from Schoolcraft to Cedar Rapids to improve our competitiveness. Based on this shift, we successfully avoided capital investments in our Michigan facility. Once capacity limitations are being reached in Michigan, we obviously will have to decide in which state we should further invest. And electricity, believe me, will be a large driver for our decision. You might wonder what we have done in addition to moving production to Cedar Rapids. We asked Indiana Michigan Power to expand their territory into Portage. They had no interest, literally they laughed at me, declined and pointed towards the Energy Commission. We studied Consumers Energy's rate book of 228 pages. I don't know if anybody has done that. I invite you to do that. I did. Indiana Michigan Power's rate book is 198 pages. We contacted several alternate energy suppliers and solicited quotes. In 2011, we signed a contract for our Portage plant, which put us in the queue. We became a member and active supporter of Energy Choice Now. We wrote to Governor Snyder, State Representative Margaret O'Brien, Senator Tonya Schutmaker, and others and asked for their support. In March 2012, we contacted the local economic development organization for Southwest Michigan. We explored the position of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce and were told the Michigan Chamber continues to support the current law of 2008. We verified the position of our local Kalamazoo Chamber of Commerce, of which we were a member. The response was that they will not support efforts to increase the cap. Therefore, we feel our interests are not being supported and we decided to discontinue our membership. We also reached out to many business partners and found out that the cap issue is widely unknown. It appears too complex, political, and too difficult to explore. Rate books are hard to find and overwhelming. There seems to be a resignation among electricity users. It seems that we are a society, are so used to this situation that we do not even participate in a political and democratic dialogue about electric competition anymore. I would like to call on you to wake us up and help Michigan to grow. I personally believe that America is a free country with business laws that I learned foster competition in order to keep costs low for its citizens. The Sherman Antitrust Act is evidence for that. My daughter, 14 years of age, she just had that subject in school. Found it pretty interesting. It would only be fair if this act could be applied to electric competition as it applies to us and all other businesses. It is widely understood and unquestioned that free and unrestrained commerce is essential to technological development and will lead to cost reduction. This will stimulate growth and economic well-being. Therefore, the saying, competition is good for business. Protectionism and monopolizing markets slows down progress and evolution. this can eventually cause economic failure. An admittedly drastic example is many communistic countries essentially lost their technological edge because their political environment eliminated competition. These countries economically fell behind and are suffering or have even failed. The utility providers use significant legal support to convince the Energy Commission, whereas we as residential and or business users of electricity do not have the financial means for equal legal representation and involvement. In our business at J. Reitmeier USA LP, we fight hard to be successful. And as other companies, we have struggled and are struggling while Michigan's economy is still trying to recover. Transportation and distribution of electricity is and should be protected for the owners of the assets of that infrastructure. But electricity as a commodity should be traded freely as any other goods. If I compare electricity wires with highways, the use of these highways is also not tied to the value of the goods that are being transported on them. Because the electricity utilities' interests are protected and competition is constrained, I believe it is acceptable for me to make these last comments. Michigan's investor-owned utility companies have a solid financial standing and are providing significant earnings and shareholder value as evidenced by their published annual reports. CMS Energy. You can retrieve it from the internet. It is my understanding that Michigan's electrical utility companies by law have a guaranteed return of investment of 11%, which is, I believe, achieved by tariff rate increases. While Michigan is fighting to recover from a tough recession, Consumer Energy reported 2007 net income of $312 million. That grew by $155 million, or 50% in 5 years, to $467 million in 2011. Despite dropping electricity sales by 2.6% to 38 billion kWh in the same 5 years time frame. And 179 jobs were cut along the way, I might add. According to their own, Consumer's own proxy statement from May, on page 30, the executive management team of 6 people received a reported combined total compensation of $16.2 million in 2011, up $6.4 million from 2009, 2 years earlier. Is that where our rate increases are going? I sincerely hope that Michigan will join the group of states that allow electrical competition as soon as possible, and that our governor's gardening efforts will be successful for Michigan as well. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, please help our electricity-dependent businesses and their employees in Michigan. It is definitely time for a change. Thank you.